Good morning. One of the things that a lot of organisations really struggle with is a sense that they don't feel that their employees take enough responsibility, don't necessarily take enough initiative, don't make enough decisions at the front line, and lots of things get escalated up to managers to make decisions or leadership teams. Even if the employee knows what the right thing to do is, they may be sort of subject to actually getting validation from their people. And this is potentially a real problem, because what it does is it makes the manager become the chief problem solver. People feel disempowered. It slows things down because it takes a while to make decisions, and all of a sudden you get bottlenecks as well. But if you have to sort of understand the reasons why it happens, often it's not primarily the responsibility of the employee. It's a systemic breakdown. It's a problem of process and unwieldy policy. I think policy is often described as the scar tissue of previous mistakes. So a lot of organisations that have been really focused on high growth have really thought about how to challenge this. And there's some quite famous examples out there, which we'll just pull on. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of share two organisations' experiences of tackling this, and how it's actually been implemented in practice. And then we'll leave you a bit of a few thoughts about how you might want to apply this in your own organisation as well. So we did a video on delegation, which again sort of sets out a really nice process for encouraging autonomy in people, but in alignment with the organisation's needs. And this is really in that same camp, that kind of helping employees have autonomy and decision-making rights, so that they can actually do the job in the way that they feel is most appropriate and bring their creativity. So the two examples we've got are Amazon and Netflix. There's typical business case study organisations, but they've got some really nice examples here. So Netflix was challenging itself to grow much faster, and there was a frustration that a lot of employees weren't getting it. And so they developed something called the Freedom and Responsibility Slide Deck. And the Freedom and Responsibility Slide Deck is quite a famous document. It's open source, so we'll put a link to it in the comments. So it's around about 100 slides, and what it does is it sets out Netflix's expectations of how their people should approach decision making, and particularly their managers as well. And people are held accountable for it. When you read it, it is quite aggressive language, and they do have quite an aggressive approach to their people. So they don't suffer fools gladly. I think the mantra is average performance equals generous severance. Apologies if it's a bit windy here. I'm out on the baby walk this morning. So in this, they sort of set out their expectations. I'll give you a couple of examples. So one is you identify the root cause and get beyond treating the symptoms. So that lays out an expectation that their employees will challenge their assumptions, take a step back when there's a difficult decision to make, and not make a quick response. They'll really look at what's underlying. And I think that in lots of organizations, that people, just because we're so fast and we're so time poor, we just fix the symptoms and don't make time to actually fix the underlying problem and bring more members of the system in to fix things. And so you end up with something called organization debt. We've written an article about that, which is, it's just the build-up of all of the workarounds and bodge tape that we put on systems and processes just to keep working at capacity in order to make the number or the target that we're working to. And this builds up over time and creates an enormous amount of inertia. And the second one is seek what is best for Netflix and not for your group, or yourself. And this is really interesting because this encourages something called enterprise mindset, which again we did a video about recently. And so it means that people are actually looking upstream and downstream from where they are and thinking about the impact of the decisions that they're making. So a lot of organizations set individual targets for people. So what they do is when they make a decision, it's in the service of achieving that target. And you end up with, you end up with more complexity and more challenge around there as well. A third one is take smart risks. So what that means is there's an expectation that you will take risks. And that's really interesting, because to grow a business, you have to take risks. But what they're saying is, don't take too many risks. Just be calculated about it, work it out, do some analysis, keep it contained. But we do want you to continually grow, innovate, stretch, whatever it is as well. And people are held accountable for it, all of those values, and it's really worth a read actually. The other example we talked about is Amazon. So Amazon has like over 1 million employees around the world. So how on earth do you embed a belief system into their managers across the world. And so on their website, they've got a whole range of values. And again, we'll put a link to those, and they're really interesting. But some of those ones are think long term and don't sacrifice long term value for short term results. Again, what it does is it sort of says, rather than sort of chase the quarter number, if we feel that this is going to be to the detriment, and we've all seen it, haven't we? We're always trying to desperately hit a deadline, and so what we do is we actually go against our better judgment, and then it has an implicative effect. So it's about keeping our mind really clearly on the long term, but also be really clear what is the long term. A lot of organizations don't even give themselves permission about what is the long term for us as well. Another one is when you're making a decision, speak to numerous people outside of your team. I really like that. What it does on a whole range of things baked into that is it encourages you to take an external perspective, so more insights, more opinions, therefore probably a better solution. But what it also means as well is that you're a lot more likely to get buy-in when you do implement the decision, because the people that are going to be impacted have been consulted and engaged in the process. So a hard to make decision doesn't become a hard to swallow decision. So both of these organizations, they've got great things about them and not so great about them, but they've really harnessed the power of decision criteria to drive the organization forward. Now with many things, there's often an unintended consequence, because if you are a highly regulated organization or you have specific processes, then this will challenge it, because what it will do is it will create variance, and people will start to bring sort of different applications of working. So it's really important to think very carefully before you implement it, how much freedom you want to give people, what kind of boundaries you want to put in place, and then let go of control a little bit, which is quite difficult. And often managers, when they start to see things going slightly awry, will often step in, and that actually has a worse impact than not setting the criteria in the first place, because people are like, well, there's no point engaging in this process. So think really carefully, engage with your people in the process, start small, do some experiments, work with a team and work it through and get their feedback and iterate, but don't step in at the first opportunity. Review. And the freedom and responsibility slide deck for Netflix has been through 2 iterations, so it's always evolving and it needs to match the needs of the business. So it's okay to keep it moving as well. So if you were to do it in your own organization, what would you want to set as your decision criteria? What do you think the challenges might be to actually implement it? And what kind of teams, who would you want to work with to get it started in the first place, to really sort of unlock all of that latent talent in our organizations?